Program is called Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, and we do this on Wednesday mornings between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Russell Singleton joining us in studio today. Russell, of course, physician assistant at Tripp Family Medicine, and we're talking about all those people who may spend a little bit too much time using social media. I think a lot of people out there can identify with that. First of all, Russell, I want to make sure we're on the right microphone here.
Can you hear me now, Bill?
I can, but there we go. Now the audience can. We moved the microphones around today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back here
No,
today.
there you go. I'm sure you're there somewhere. You said it's a pleasure to be back.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Ah,
Can you hear me now?
yes, it sounds like an old commercial I used to watch.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about a couple of different things. And the first thing is Pokemon. We're going to talk about Pokemon
Wow.
today. If you haven't heard enough about that, we're going to talk more about that. And I'm sure everyone's just eyes are rolling and long sighs are being let out right now. And if you haven't changed the channel, we'll actually use that as a jumping off point to talk about technology in our lives, and especially connected technology, the internet, handheld devices, and social media.
This is a little different than now. Those of us who raised children in the 1990s had to deal with this Pokemon phenomenon at the time. But this is not about toys for children any longer. This is about adults getting addicted to a cell phone app.
Yeah, and you know what kind of got me thinking was the fact that this is based on augmented reality. That these people um, are basically traversing the landscape looking for these uh, these digital creatures that they then, I guess, they train, they evolve, and they fight them. But excuse me. But I think the big issue is how much time they're dedicating to being in front of that screen and the types of activities that that displaces, and how that can eventually affect not only their physical health but their mental health.
I remember playing a game years ago when it first was introduced on the computer called Civilization. And remember one day playing it and then suddenly looking at the clock and realized I had lost track of time. I had been there for 8 hours and had accomplished nothing else during the day. It's that same type of feeling, isn't it? It's that same, I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but to a lot of people, you would look at it and say, this is a little too much.
You know, I think it depends on what we're doing. Obviously, technology is a tool, and to to say that technology or the internet even is bad would be an incredibly difficult statement because there's such a broad scope of activities that you can partake in while using technology or using the internet. Today, in particular, though, we're going to talk about social networks. We're going to talk about how that can influence feelings of depression, not only in adolescents but in older adults. We might talk a little bit about a couple of other common activities people use the internet for. And yes, I'm going to call out WebMD today. We'll talk a little bit about that. But then, if we have time, I thought I'd also mention a little bit about the whole cell phone and cancer link. I know that that has been going around for quite some time, and we'll talk about some studies that really dug into that, and we'll talk about whether or not there really is a link between cell phone use and brain cancer or even other types of cancer.
I would assume, too, a lot of that comes down to how much time people actually spend talking on a cell phone. Some of us use it sparingly, and other people I know, I mean, they walk around with that phone glued, it seems, to their ears all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is some of the studies that looked at this could not find what we call a dose dependent relationship, meaning that if something like cell phone use causes cancer, you would expect those who use it more would have higher incidences of cancer, and that wasn't the case at all. You'd also expect to see an increase in tumors on that particular side of the head. If you know if you're right-handed, maybe you use the phone on the right side, but that didn't bear out in studies either. I think the most interesting part of that discussion has to do with the type of radiation that cell phones actually emit. It's called RF radiation or radio frequency waves. And a lot like visible light or heat or FM waves or microwaves, it's non-ionizing, which means it doesn't have sufficient power to actually alter cellular DNA.
I just know that years ago I was working at a TV station I took a job there in March of 1998, and my seat in my office faced a room with a transmitter behind me. And right at the top of my seat, in a couple of months, I developed a fatty tumor on my back. And but the doctor said I can't find any relationship between your proximity 6 to 12 feet away from a television transmitter to actually say that that would have played a role in all of that.
Well, and there's a lot of variability in how people use cell phones. We talked about length of time, but what activities are they doing? Are they talking on it? Are they playing something like Pokemon where the phone is actually out in front of them, or similar to maybe if they were using speakerphone or browsing the internet? But then not all cell phones are created equal. It depends on the proximity to a cell tower. The cell phone can use, well, it basically emits more power to reach a cell tower that's further away. And so that your physical location plays into that too. And so there are just so many factors. No study that has showed any correlation, however slight, has really been reproducible.
We've got more with Russell Singleton on the way. It's 8:40, and it's 61. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine on KLIX. Our studio guest is joining us this morning. He's here until 9 o'clock. It's called Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Russell Singleton, physician assistant at Tripp Family Medicine. And we're talking about social media, pluses and minuses today, because these can have an impact on your health. And we were just chatting off air about all of these people who are now downloading this new Pokemon app. And these are adults mainly, not necessarily the children who used to play with the toys back in the 1990s. And some of them are getting so tied up in the game, they're losing track of their surroundings, and that's really bad for their health. They trip, they fall, they end up in bad places, and the like.
Yeah, there's been muggings I've heard because there's criminals out there. I don't know if they're staking out these locations where there are rewards to be earned on the video game, but then people are getting robbed and mugged. And I think you bring up a good point when you talk about losing touch with their surroundings, with their reality, because that will lead us into a discussion on social networks and whether or not those it can lead to or contribute to symptoms of depression in and not just adolescents but in adults too. There was an interesting study a couple of years ago out of the University of Michigan that kind of kicked off this crusade against Facebook and how um, the more people use Facebook, the more depressed they are, and that's what they found. They interviewed between 80 and 100 university students over 2 weeks, and they basically tracked how often they used Facebook, and they had them also rate their feeling of well-being. And the conclusion was that the more often they were using Facebook, or the more they use Facebook, the lower they rated on feelings of well-being and self-esteem.
I think that just it's that lack of face to face contact, isn't it? That we really do need contact with other humans. Unless you're living up in the Alaskan outback, by choice, you need contact with other people.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at again what activities people are doing on Facebook because just like you can't really say the internet is bad or technology is bad or good or whatever. Facebook is so complex that it would be hard to draw a single conclusion um, without looking at what people are actually doing. So it was interesting, not only this study, but looking at a couple of other studies, like one out of Humboldt University, for example, specifically noted that people were most depressed when they were doing one of two things, when they were browsing a news feed. So rather than talking to real people and using it to communicate with friends and family, but just looking at the highlights of other people's lives. They also specifically noted how browsing vacation photos of your friends and family was especially depressing. And it's this, I don't know whether it's a fear of missing out or just comparing the highlights of another person's life to the lowlights of your life, but those same effects were not seen when people used Facebook to actually communicate and talk to people. And interestingly enough, older adults, those over 50, don't seem to have some of the same effects that adolescents do. Older adults typically find a lot more enjoyment out of Facebook, and I think it's because they're coming from a foundation of face-to-face social interaction, and Facebook simply augments that. Where a lot of younger kids are using this as a replacement, or it's their first introduction to to quote unquote social networking.
One of my former church deacons went to Germany with one of his sons a couple of weeks ago, and they were posting photographs from their trip in Germany. And I looked at those, and I was impressed because I'd like to see some of these things too. We'd all like to travel, but I'm old enough where I have done a lot of traveling, and I think if you're 20 years old and you haven't, that's where the depressing part of this might come in because you think, well, I'll never be able to do those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we talk about bullying and how adolescents can be exposed to cyberbullying. There is a statistic from the National Crime Prevention Council here in the U.S. that stated half of all teenagers, this came to be in 2011, but half of all teens had been exposed to some type of cyberbullying on the internet. And that's incredibly disheartening. There was a story a couple years ago about a high school in Ohio. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but it was Hudson High School, and the story was about how there was this anonymous Twitter account and it was set up and they would just tweet things about random students, about the student body in general, and it just induced a firestorm of attention, and it was incredibly disruptive. And I think that we see that not only on Facebook and Twitter, but there's a lot of other apps and websites that are specifically designed for teens and I guess anyone to be anonymous and to talk about other people, to insult other people, and for some reason, our kids, our youth, seem especially attracted to that.
And some of these people end up being, I'm sure, treated for depressive issues at some point.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of high profile suicides in adolescents who have uh, at least in the aftermath talked about or somehow traced part of their struggle to social media of some sort.
Is it possible though too that if somebody already had some mental issues, depression, that this is actually pushing them a little bit closer to the edge, that they came into social media already at risk, and social media just was the vehicle to actually get them there.
That's a great question, and that reminds me of something we say in medicine all the time, that correlation does not necessarily equal causation, and and it's a valid question. Do depressed people use Facebook more, or does Facebook actually cause depression? And that remains to be seen. There was yet another study that compared underclassmen at a university to upperclassmen. And interestingly enough, the underclassmen were much more affected than were the upperclassmen. So it's just an incredibly variable and complex situation. But but I think one thing remains to be well, I think one thing remains constant, and that's that we need to increase more physical uh, face-to-face interaction, because we're not just talking about depression or mental health, but we're talking about physical health too. We were just joking about people texting and walking into fountains or walking in telephone posts or what have you, but I was reading a study recently that was published in the journal Pediatrics from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it found significant correlations between screen time and insomnia in children, um, eh, risk for diabetes in children, and increased risk for obesity in children.
We've all though had those, social media maybe has added a few more of these in there, but I can remember being a kid and we didn't have the internet computers in the home. But if there was a TV show on and you wanted to watch it, you stayed up late. And I used to watch Monday Night Football and Tuesday mornings, and about second period in class, I'd start to realize maybe I shouldn't have done that because I was ready to nod off. So we've all had, I guess, these similar hazards throughout our lives.
Yeah, and as a healthcare provider, when we're doing a well child check or we're doing a physical, we ask about screen time, and I think that's an incredibly important question. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that children and adolescents watch no more than 2 hours of screen time a day, and that includes TV, cell phones, tablets. It does not include academic time. So if someone needs to be on a computer or the internet or whatever to complete an assignment, that I guess that's beside the point. But recreational screen time should be limited to 2 hours. And you shouldn't have any technology in the bedroom. There shouldn't be a TV in there. There shouldn't be an internet connection in there. And don't let your kids take their cell phone in their room. In fact, I always recommend that kids shut it down an hour before they're to be in bed, and that gives them a chance to wind down. And and that kind of thing is becoming more and more uncommon, just more and more rare these days.
We talked a little bit about mental health, and we had a little discussion earlier about possible physical hazards. But this is a double-edged sword, then, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because at the same time, the the internet and even things like Facebook can be used to improve connections with distant friends and family. Can be used to educate about good health practices. Um, Interesting statistic, though, while we're on that topic, would you ever imagine that during a normal year, children and adolescents are exposed to 5,000 ads having to do with food or technology use versus 150 that are designed to help kids be healthy or eat better. So it really does come down to how you use it, and it's important that parents take charge and actually direct technology use. Because if you don't, marketing companies, food manufacturers will. They will direct what your child sees, and it will significantly influence not only their mental health, but their physical health. It all comes down to how you use that tool.
The NFL channel has a thing called Play 60, where they try to encourage kids to get outdoors and play for 60 minutes a day. It's a nice campaign, but I don't think that it necessarily is working because A, it's only on one channel, the league's own channel, and number two, you to encourage kids to get out there, they have to be other kids generally to play with, and if it's a rainy day or a cold day, hey, we're all looking for excuses, I would imagine.
Yeah, but I do agree with the recommendation, and in fact, that is something that I include in my normal counseling or lectures with patients and parents that children should not only limit their screen time to 2 hours a day, but that they should be playing outside an hour a day. And you'd be amazed how many people will look at me and say, "Well, it's hot outside," or "It's cold outside," or "It's snowing. What? He can't go outside," as if there wasn't anything to do in the snow, and you couldn't put a coat on, or you couldn't go swimming, or something that was maybe appropriate to the season.
I don't ever recall that stopping us when we were kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Something else I encourage parents to do when we're talking about their child's physical health and combating those marketing and media campaigns is to talk about 5210. And 5 stands for 5 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. I try and get parents to at least have their child's plate be half full of fruits and or vegetables at every meal. 2 stands for the 2 hours or less of screen time every day. 1 stands for an hour of outside play, and there's that get out 60 that you were talking about. And then 0 stands for 0 sweetened drinks. There's some studies that show that the more TV children watch, the more sugar and the more fat they consume. And for every hour that a child watches TV at age 5, their risk for developing obesity goes up by 7%. So you have to set the precedent. You have to establish the norm and not let someone else make those decisions for your family.
About a minute to go. Contact information for the office and anything important that we didn't mention.
Give us a call at 933-4400. Dr. Tripp and his family are in Nicaragua right now. So it's Jeremy, Crystal, and I holding down the fort, and we wish the Tripps well, and we wish they have a safe return. But we still have plenty of availability, and we're happy to see you whenever you need it.
I was going to say the trip is one that he'll have a lot of stories about when he comes back.
Yeah, I think they're doing a wonderful thing, and we got some photos via text messages. They were leaving, I think, the Houston airport. So I'm sure they've touched down by now, and I just wish them the best of luck and look forward to hearing their stories.
You're probably not going to see many photos for the next few days because I think they have limited coverage out there in the jungle of Nicaragua.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know where he's gonna find me a T-shirt to bring back, but I'm keeping my fingers
I think
crossed.
he'll stop in Managua. They probably have a minor league baseball club there, and he can maybe get you a little bit of a souvenir at one of the shops.
Yeah, I asked for a poncho too, and Dr. Tripp actually, and I'm not joking here, he told me he was gonna bring me home a rock.
Well, we'll see one of you again next week.
Absolutely.
All right, I want to thank Russell Singleton for joining us from Tripp Family Medicine. It's Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. News from Fox is coming up in just a moment. Also, want to point out in the next hour of the program some of the things we're going to be talking about. There's a piece in the Wall Street Journal today about 6 things, if we get to this, I say if we get to it, 6 things you should know about the now year-old deal that the president signed with the government of Iran, the nuclear deal. That may be, I had to say may, because we have a lot still to talk about in the next hour.